Driveway drama with landlocked neighbors. The vertical gray strip on the left side of the image is the public main road. I own the land in pink. Our private road we use to access it is entirely on our land, surrounded by pink, denoted by our road. It has a locked gate, and the sides of our land that are against roads are fenced. We have remotes for it, or can open-close it from our house. The neighbor used to own the land in blue and purple, but sold the purple land to someone else a couple of weeks ago. They accessed their property by a gravel road on the purple land before, but the person who owns it now is planning on getting rid of that gravel road. Apparently, when they sold the land, they were assuming they could start using our private driveway instead. They didn't actually check with us first. They've effectively landlocked themselves, ultimately. The neighbors want to use our road, denoted in gray, and make a gravel road from our road onto their property in blue that they still own. We have had some heated discussions about it, and things went downhill fast. They say that by not giving them access to our private road, we are infringing the rights of their property ownership. Now they are threatening to sue us. If they sue, is it likely that a judge would require us to let them use our road? Do we need to lawyer up? Going by general principles of easements and property transfers, when Blue severed his parcel into blue and purple, he should have reserved an easement across purple. You have no legal relationship with Blue and no duty to provide Blue with access. That Blue did not check with you for permission first is not your problem. An easement is a burden on title. A parcel of land carrying an easement is, at least in theory, reduced in value to some extent. Thus, a neighboring landowner with whom you have no legal relationship cannot impose a burden on your land. Something you do has to give rise to the easement. I cannot imagine your neighbor having any recourse against you whatsoever. If he were the purple guy and sold off the blue portion to a third party, that party could claim an easement by implication, or by necessity, against purple. Court assumes that the purchaser wouldn't have made the purchase without assuming he'd have access. It's a little different in Blue's case. He may or may not be able to claim an easement against purple. Against you, can't see it. Don't worry about an attorney unless he sues you. If you decide to allow him access or reach some kind of settlement, make sure to use a written lease that shows that he has your permission to use the access. You want it in writing. He may have no intention of attempting to gain an easement by prescription, and your state's laws may not allow it under these conditions. But a writing is cheap to do and defeats any claim of easement by prescription. Prescriptive easement is when you are unaware of or ignore your neighbor using your land for a long period of time, such that he can later claim a right to use it indefinitely. Giving explicit permission to use the land defeats this, since it shows you were aware of and not ignoring your rights. Google MN easement by necessity and look at the top unsponsored link. I'd paste the link, but my browser is making it unintelligible. Anyway, it's a link to a PDF that appears to discuss easements in MN. I can't vouch for it since I'm not barred in MN, but it appears to cover the ground. Update 1. My neighbors sold part of their land in a way that left them landlocked because they assumed I would let them access their property via my road, which is gated and locked at all times. I got a lawyer and met with him. We hashed out a plan and I was feeling pretty good about everything. Yesterday, Sunday, around noon, the purple landowners finished fencing in their property. My neighbors came home at about 3 p.m. and rang at the gate several times. I was advised by you guys, as well as my lawyer, to not let them in my gate even once, as that would set a precedent of them being allowed to use it. So, I ignored the ringing. Eventually, the husband got out of the car and walked around to the other side of my property, which is not yet fenced in. He used that to get to my house and knocked on the door. I answered and told him I will not allow him to use my gate and to leave my property. He told me he wouldn't leave until I opened the gate so his wife could drive the car through. I said I would not do so and threatened to call the police. He walked left and went back to the car. Then they started ringing the gate again. I looked out the window and they had a police officer with them. I went to the gate and informed the police officer that this is my property and I will not allow them to drive on it. I said that they have no legal right to access my property. Then I walked back to the house. After a couple of minutes, the police officer walked around to get onto my land and to the house and knocked at the door. He said that because their land is landlocked, I need to allow them to use my road until another solution can be figured out, and I can't just deny them access to their property. I called my lawyer, who spoke with the police officer on the phone. The police officer acknowledged that he cannot force me to let them drive on my property, but that he strongly encourages me to work this out with my neighbors in a civil manner. He left. The neighbors left their car in front of my gate, walked around to the unfenced part of my land, walked across my yard, and onto their own property. I called my lawyer. We reported them for trespassing today. They left their car there until about 10 a.m. this morning. Tonight, I was visited by the sheriff. He told me very short and sweet that I cannot deny my neighbors access to their property via an established road. He said, "I better not get another call. From this point forward, you will allow them to get to and from their property and will not lock them out or in." Then he walked away, called the lawyer. I am meeting with the lawyer in the morning. I am planning to ask her the following questions. Is there a point where I should give in to a police officer's request that I let them use my road? If they block my gate again, can I have their car towed? The way they parked it, I would not have been able to leave my property via the gate. They were parked on my land at the time, not on the public road. Update 2. Some funny and some conflicting advice from all of you. The overwhelming advice was to get a lawyer, which I did. I explained the situation and that I had posted here, as well as the many topics you all prompted me to read up on, which was very helpful. While my lawyer seemed pleased with your advice to me, he also urged me to immediately stop publicly posting about the situation, which I did, and which I see from my many messages has disappointed all of you. First things first, everything worked out in my favor. My wife was upset by the entire situation, and especially concerned with our children, and she got involved as well. She spoke with some friends who were able to get her in touch with the local city council. They could not explicitly do anything direct to help us, but did get us in touch with some of the right people to discuss our situation. One of the most important results from those connections was learning that the sheriff, who we spoke to, was actually a deputy who was acting on the sheriff's behalf. We were able to meet with the actual sheriff. He did agree that we should be more open to compromise, but was much more willing to admit that we had no immediate legal reason to do so, and no interest in forcing us to. My lawyer made a key point of the fact, I use the term loosely, that if the neighbors require an easement to access their land, they should so with the land they sold, and not with unrelated land. After a lot of back and forth, but no court proceedings luckily, with the other party, their attention was refocused on the buyer of their land. Funny enough, it's a small world, and I ended up meeting the buyer who was in my lawyer's office for a consultation with one of his partners. He ended up needing to get a different lawyer, since I already had a lawyer from the firm, as I understand it. But we did keep in contact to some extent. Now, some speculation. We believe that the reason the neighbors didn't bother us for a while was their finances. Their lawyer was happy to keep pushing as long as he was getting paid, but when money ran dry, he lost interest. Due, we believe, to those financial problems as well as their inability to find a quick solution, the neighbors ultimately moved into town and lived with family there for several months. The neighbor on the other side gave them one-time access with a moving truck. Their lawyer had been showing up with them but was gone at that time, which is another reason I suspect major money issues. In the fall, the situation picked up again, with contact from a new lawyer this time. This new lawyer requested a meeting with us, and our lawyer, of course. He requested that we consider buying their property to resolve the issue. We initially said no. They offered it to the owner on the other side. They said no. They sweetened the pot. Eventually, the price was right, and my wife and I had developed an interest in more land. We discussed terms, then decided against it. They went a little cheaper again. We purchased their land. I nearly posted an update once the purchase was complete, but there was an additional interesting detail that came out of the woodwork and brought new legal questions. The neighbors had used their land and home as collateral for an informal loan, and the person who lent to them wanted the property when they failed to repay him. He came after us. The outcome of this was that they are the ones who failed their end of the contract, so his problem was with the neighbors, not with us. This is definitely a sideline from the original situation, but caused a delay in my ability to update. As of today, my wife and I are out a substantial amount of money due to legal fees, which it turned out was not worth going after from the neighbors. There is also bad news in that the home on that property was essentially worth even less than we thought. And there were major issues beyond the land itself. Septic tank failure, leaking oil tank. Those expenses were slightly mitigated by insurance, but we are out a good sum. We also had a hard time combining the plots, which was legally desirable to build anything that straddled the two property lines. However, the plots are now combined into one large plot. The good is that the neighbors are no longer an issue for us, and by this summer their property should be in good shape to use for a new project of our own. On one hand, I will say this: the little chunk of land was definitely not worth the time and stress involved in this process, nor the money. However, the outcome was positive for our family, for which there is no dollar value, and it's all over with now. My sincere thanks to everyone who offered advice. There are far too many of you to thank individually, but please know that I appreciated everyone's contributions, and I hope you're all still around to read my much-delayed resolution.